There's a thing that I read recently that we're raising a generation of stupid people.
I would disagree. Young people are growing up in a world that we have created for them. We have skin in the game. We're just putting them into boxes that don't enable them, and we need to stop that. The problem isn't them, the problem is us. We shouldn't dumb them down that much. The problem is that we adjust when we actually need to hold our ground and let them develop their skills. They are capable people. 3 facilities in this precinct and no one can tell the difference between them. You've got a primary school, you've got a high school, and you've got a prison. How terrible is that? We've got to actually flip this. So there's a concept called 4 C's. So collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, and communication. And if you think about any workplace, anywhere, they are what I would call foundational skills. If you get that part right, you will adapt and you will evolve as you do across your work life. So getting the right spatial design that encourages these behaviours. Every surface needs to have a learning intent behind that. We need every piece of the wall to work hard, particularly in contemporary learning environments where there is a lot more transparency and connection from space to space. How do you turn a student into a director, as an example? And there are many steps in between, but enabling people in an orchestrated way, where do we stretch them and where is comfort? So I like the general premise around an 80-20 rule. Everyone should be 80% comfy, 20% uncomfy. Uncomfy is where we learn. And it's okay to be uncomfortable while you're learning. That as you're designing something, you don't need to scurry away in the corner and make everything perfect and be that hero architect that comes along and says, I've saved the day. The team needs to work together.
Welcome to Slicing Through the Noise. We're going to talk today to Daniel Smith from Leaf Architecture. If you go and have a look at his website, it's really interesting. He's niched, he's specific, and he's proud of what he's doing and the difference that he's making in a very specific market. So I'm very excited to have Daniel along today. He's already given us a few nuggets that I want to really pull out of him just in our little introduction conversation. So welcome, Daniel.
Thank you, Jennifer.
So good to see you. So, you know, you said some things as we were just talking and I'm going, yes, yes, yes. Right.
Now I have to remember them. No?
We've recorded them.
Hey.
So, you know, one of the things I know that you have said is that a child entering kindy today won't finish school until 2040.
Yeah. So when they enter the workforce, and this is something which I like to think about, if we think about what's relevant to them and we compare it against our life and our life experiences, we're already pulling them behind. Yeah. So I was educated in the 80s and the 90s. And if we think about the world in the 80s and the 90s to where we are today, already there are remarkable differences. And there are quotes that are flung around and attributed to many different people, but at the end of the day, it's all the same premise. If you think the change has been fast, it will never be this slow again. And it's going to keep that way. You know, there was a clip many clips actually, if you go on social media and there's robots doing dances and things like that. The world is about to change yet again, and AI has already been integrated to our day-to-day life. And this is why I believe in education and the power of it when it gets to the core, and it's not about repeating fact. It's about the skills and the adaptation and those transversal skills that we need to develop in our young people. And that's what I'd like to, I guess, focus our practice on to create the spaces that engage people in said manner.
So what's relevant for today is already too late.
Correct.
And I loved that thing that you said. And for anyone in any business, can you future pace yourself? What does that mean for leaders designing schools and companies?
So I think if we look at it through the lens initially as the school before we look at the company component, the school component, I think we need to be ready for adaptation. And I say adaptation, not flexibility, and I use that word deliberately because adaptation implies some intent.
Such a good word.
It really is. We often use flexibility as though it's a catch cry. What I think is it's a word for a lazy designer. I say lazy because you could do lots of different things. We're not mapping them out. We should actually map them out, and we should be intentful about our choices. And it comes down to, I guess, our elevator pitch, I guess, as a practice is human-centered, research-driven design. We
say that again. It's beautiful.
Human-centered, research-driven design. And in that instance, we should have that intent and that knowledge base that we apply on our work. So when we look at the design of, say, a school and what we need to do in order to make that, I guess, future-proof, and perhaps future-proof with inverted commas, it's about, I guess, a couple of different layers. One, we need to design a structure that will survive future adaptation. It will have that. And we need to design a building that is robust enough to be refitted out, like every building in the CBD, as an example. I couldn't point to a building that wouldn't have had an internal layout change in that precinct. A school will be the same. There will be ebbs and flows around teaching and learning. There will be changes in technology. There will be a whole suite of things that they'll need to accommodate over the next, say, 20, 50, 60 years. But the structure should be sound in order to accommodate that. The services spines need to be sound and done in an intentful way to not cause grief for a future design team, to enable a swift change. And if you look at, say, schools like St Andrew's Cathedral School, as an example, they'll refit a floor out on a Christmas holiday. They've set up well to do that, and I think a lot of schools can learn from that. So
tell me about that. How come they're set up well, and what did they do?
Once again, it's taking the cue from a commercial building because it is a commercial building. So cores are put in a specific location and they never get moved. Where the services run are once again wrapped around cores or perimeters, and then the rest of the space is available for change. And we need to think a little bit about that, I guess, with schools in terms of buildings, even if they do have a bespoke fit out, should be viewed, I think, with an eye of what happens next. What happens in, say, 20 years' time when they do need to change that? I've already refitted out buildings that I've designed as a young architect. Change will be continual, but then also thinking about change on perhaps a smaller scale and how we can adapt a space on the day-to-day, as an example. And I think then that's where we have to get really detailed and start to map out what I would refer to as learning settings. So a setting of space and tools and resources around. So if we view architecture less as a shopping list of items that we might want and start to think about how do we enable certain learning behaviours that are driven by a pedagogy to then create a learning setting that will not just enable but reflect the pedagogy, then we're going to get something really successful. And then we can start to look. I want to
bottle you right now. I really do. I want to bottle you and I want to send you to all these schools that have got major things happening. Yeah. And I've looked at them and, I've got lots of grandchildren, right? So I'm going to a lot of schools and I'm going, what are they doing?
That's it. And that's why I'm involved with a group called Learning Environments Australasia. Essentially, we are the peak body for school design in Australia and New Zealand. And our aim is to lift the floor of the industry. And we're doing it bit by bit as best as we're able to as a peak body and a not-for-profit. Yeah. But the whole point is nothing bad can really happen if we're intentful and we're careful with what we do with education. And if we take that step back and look at, I guess, the country as a whole, we're a first world nation. We have no excuse. We have the wealth in order to facilitate the right foundation for our young people. And in fact, we have the obligation to do that. We have everything in front of us. We've got to stop just thinking we don't have the money to ... We've got to look at what we can do with our money and how we can be more intentful with that rather than being flippant and wasteful. The resources are there. It's just up to us to be careful with what we do.
So I want to just wind back a little bit. How come you chose learning environments as your lane? Because you're very niched.
It's a very good question. And I'd like to say it was something a lot more intentful than actually what it was.
It wasn't by design, it was by accident.
No, it was definitely by accident. I happened as a young person to actually, this how long ago it was, I opened up the phone book and I was looking through architecture practices and one by one I just went out to them. And I was a student at the time and I wanted to get some part-time work. And I happened to work at a practice that happened to do a lot of schools. So I did a year of work. I had a year off uni and I did some work there, which was quite valuable. And then after I finished my degree, they got in touch with me and I went back. As I went back, I had a really rare opportunity to work on a brand new school, but also at the same time, that school was led by Greg Whitby, who unfortunately now has passed away, but he was at the time a very big and innovative thinker in the space of education, and he has, to a certain extent, a global footprint with what he delivered. Now, for better or for worse, it usually has a polarizing effect on people as to whether they like or dislike him, but that was kind of the intro to the world of learning space design and how we can be more intentful with our choices. And from that point, when I started to learn a little bit about that and the impacts of our young people, I got hooked. And I started to invest more time to learn about the research in the space, to learn about, I guess, the ebbs and flows, not just across Sydney, but around Australia and the globe. And it's been an amazing journey in order to get to that point.
So, I mean, like, that's pretty exciting.
It is.
It's
And
massive.
as an opportunity for a young person, brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
So, there's a thing that I read recently that we're raising a generation of stupid people. Have you heard that?
I haven't, but I would disagree, I think.
Right.
I would disagree.
So what is going on in the educational space that you design, right, that works, yeah? And what are you discovering young people, young kids, young children need so that they can read, write and do arithmetic?
I think in terms of that, the deep breath moment is young people are growing up in a world that we have created for them. We have skin in the game. We have created this. I would say that young people aren't stupid. In fact, I was at a school last night, and Marsden Park Anglican School, which is led by Darren Cox, who's a very talented educator. And the presentation from the young people in his school, there was a child who's in year 8, he was articulate. They are phenomenal. They have talent. We've got to create a framework where we can enable them to shine. And some of these things is, because a lot of these verbs like thrive and shine, it's a bit of a, like, they catch cries. And what does it actually mean in reality? It makes you feel good while you say it and you hear it. But what does that mean? And to me, what that means is we're actually creating an opportunity for them to develop the skills that perhaps they aren't going to form elsewhere. Now, if you think about, say, your childhood or my childhood, it's probably close enough in the scheme of things. What did you do when you were after school? You're probably out with some friends and you're doing things and you're exploring, the local, that local sort of ecosystem that you were allowed, knowing that there were boundaries and all that sort of stuff. So you had your bounded autonomy. Now we control children's lives almost from top to toe. And what this is enabling, or I guess creating, is that there is a decline in social skills. So we're now getting kids who are too afraid to speak their opinion. They text each other, they are doing all these sorts of things, but they're not actually forming the relationships and having those formative experiences that they once had. Now, let's layer that into a learning context. And we're now getting, for instance, kids who have been in some schools, for instance, where we're talking about, what clock to select. And I'm like, okay, well, pop a clock up on the wall, that's easy. Well, the kids can't read analog. We should probably have digital. Okay, put a digital clock up, fine, whatever. And then another comment came, which really surprised me, which was, in an exam scenario, we needed to have a countdown because some of the kids won't know how much time they've got left. And I'm thinking we shouldn't dumb them down that much. The problem is that we adjust when we actually need to hold our ground and let them develop their skills. They are capable people, just like you and I were. We've got to hold the ground on that. And I think this is where I do believe in education. And I think Australia, to be honest, with what I see internationally, we are one of the best in the world. And we actually should be proud of that.
And we're scared that we're not doing it well.
I know. And I guess one of the things, and this is inherent in Australian culture, is I guess a bit of FOMO and a little bit of whatever we're doing isn't good enough, / if someone gets too good, we want to cut them down a peg. All those things are rubbish. But I think in this instance, genuinely speaking, I've travelled schools around China, America, Canada, New Zealand, Australia. We do well. We are up there. Now, some of the skills that we tend to get right, I think, is the ability for people to work together. And it's something that sets us apart often, say, in Asia, as an example. And when we think about that, it doesn't necessarily matter that they don't know a fact or a quote or something like that. They're skills that, quite frankly, they can Google at any time in their lives. But if you get the ability for people to work together, so there's a concept called 4 C's. So collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, and communication. And if you think about any workplace, anywhere, they are what I would call foundational skills. If you get that part right, you will adapt and you will evolve as you do across your work life. So getting the right spatial design that encourages these behaviors. So what I tend to think is if we're intentful that we want, kids to, fluidly grab resources, take them back, swap to something else and do things like that. And then we park them in a tight room with rows of tables and chairs. And then
That's what I grew up with.
And there is a basis for that in parts of education. So we would refer to that as explicit education. And foundationally, you need to be in a room like that if you're going to learn numeracy and literacy. Those concepts are hard until you master them. And now we need to embellish that learning with things that will help enable those transversal skills. So
literacy is really down at the moment. Tell us more, like you're designing schools knowing that literacy is down. Yeah. What are you learning from the educators as an architect that says this is what we need to design to improve literacy?
And
I mean, I'm just listening to you and I'm all excited, right? So, I'm going, this is cool.
So there's multiple things as an example. And I think we've got to, and I guess there's a lot of learnings to get them young, get them for life, so to speak. So we've got to inspire some curiosity around that. So to encourage, I guess that if you immerse yourself in a book, you could be taken to all sorts of different worlds and enjoy that. Don't stand in that way. Now, in a lot of respects, so at the moment, we're designing a library for a school just outside of Sydney. And one of the concepts that's likely to be explored there is, do we need security on the door, as an example? And the concept, which I'm pretty sure the principal will say, if a child steals a book, how bad is it that they're reading? So we just need to take a breath and say, whilst we're so used to this scarcity model on certain things, maybe we just need to breathe and say these things are okay as long as they're getting the outcome that they need. And what that says is a bit more of a welcome. So often when you think about it, say with a lot of schools, what are the first things you see? You see a fence, you see perimeter guarding, you see all these sorts of things, these layers of security. There's a fellow called Professor Michael Anderson. He's the Professor of Education in Sydney Uni, and there was a debate which I ran with Learning Environments many years ago, and one of the comments he made is there are 3 facilities in this precinct I think it was out in the Campbelltown region. And no one can tell the difference between them. You've got a primary school, you've got a high school, and you've got a prison. How terrible is that? We've got to actually flip this and start to think about what are these impacts? Because one of the problems with architecture and some facilities like schools is that we've all had experience with schools, but we have to take that deep breath moment and go, what is the intent behind what we're trying to achieve and not repeat what we've seen? We've all been in a workplace where someone says that's how we've always done it, and it annoys us as business leaders and all that sort of stuff. But we've got to, as designers, look past that. What are we trying to achieve? What's that welcome? How do we get kids in an environment where they are curious and let them have some space and time to enjoy that curiosity? So there's a lot of concept.
That's a huge debate.
Huge debate. And then there's a lot of theory around the importance of play. And often play gets associated with something quite juvenile and irrelevant to a certain extent. But play is very important. I would imagine a lot of the people that you talk to in your world are actually exploring through play to get to a really solid outcome.
We have play as a value.
There you are.
Learning through fun and laughter.
And play is so important. And it's something which I think, to a better part of it, I think Australia does get a lot of this stuff right. We've got a lot to improve on as well.
Yeah.
But having that basis of play and having that curiosity and an environment to enable that, so that comes down to, how do I feel while I'm in this space? So there's an architect called Oliver Heath in the UK, and he uses concepts around biophilic design. So the concept of that, if you were to close your eyes and describe, where do you feel most calm and most yourself? Where do you think you might say?
On my big lounge chair in my lounge room.
In your lounge room. That's an interesting.
Beautiful leather lounge chair, and I sit there and I knit.
And you knit. And describe the environment around you.
I've got pot plants all around. I can see my balcony, which has got lots of pot plants and herbs, and I love it. It's just my space.
And the commonality in that is most people start to describe some nature.
Yeah.
We feel most calm, most relaxed when we're in a biophilic design, for instance, and there is a lot of research around that. This isn't a whimsical comment from a designer. This is foundational. Now, when we start to take that concept of biophilic design principles, so Biophilic. And there's lots of layerings to that. That's not just a case of pop a few pot plants around. There'll be use of natural materials, looking at the rhythm of colours and how they're used in nature, and then replicating some of that. So you don't tend to get a lot of loud colours used in broad swatches, as an example. They tend to be used sparingly, for instance. So it's in the same concert of nature. And then lines of sight to something natural. If you can't, then maybe we replicate that, for instance, with imagery. We would call that biomimicry. Now, if we look at that, now let's combine that with our intentful design around pedagogy and spatial design. We can improve learning gains by up to 16%, and that's demonstrated by research. So if we get those elements right, we can create an environment where people, perhaps through play, have that exploration and start to grab that love of literacy. It's there. It's in our young people. Like my niece, for instance.
They love stories.
Yeah, they do. They really do. In fact, humans love stories.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what age. And, I look at my niece. She's 18 and she's just finished school, and she's just gotten her first job as a teacher's aide, and I'm really proud of her. But for her, school was always a struggle. Now, for her, everything was around literacy. She consumes books like we do drink a glass of water. And it's these talents and this thirst for, I guess, a story and knowledge that is there with our young people. We're just putting them into boxes that don't enable them, and we need to stop that. The problem isn't them, the problem is us.
So I love what you've just said. So Leaf Architecture's intent is to create an environment where learning is this joyous experience. And, I have a little post-it on my computer screen at home where my coach actually said to me, Jennifer, what's one of your fondest memories as a child? And I said, I used to climb the Moreton Bay fig tree in the park across the road. I had my blanket and a book, and I'd climb right to the top, and where the branches crossed, I would lie there with my book and the blanket and a little pillow and the clouds and the tree, and I would read. I still love that. That is my thing.
And I used to climb a tree in my backyard,
Yeah.
for instance, and read a book.
and read a book. And people go, you're reading a book up in a tree? Yeah, why not? And I'd watch the clouds go by.
That's it. It's putting yourself in a point of view of the world that you wouldn't ordinarily see.
So tell me how Leaf culture does that in the education environment where, I mean, one of my grandchildren, I went to Grandparents' Day, brand new building, and there's the stuff, but it's not alive.
That's it. And I think it comes down to some things where, I guess, as we design spaces, we need to not solve all the issues with that. We need to create, it's almost like designing a gallery. You don't design the artwork, as an example. You let that evolve and adapt over time by the users of the building. We need to do the same thing with schools. Now, I like to think that if we're creating that environment of curiosity and if we're trying to get to a concept which is called deeper learning. So deeper learning meaning, say, shallow learning. If I give you a fact and you tell me the fact back, that's shallow learning. Deeper learning is I've given you a range of different facts, you've critically thought about it, and you come back with an observation that's not evident in the information that I've passed over to you. So you've critically thought about that. We want that from our young people, and they are capable of that. So getting an environment where I guess we've got a few different catch cries, because I think the thing which I like about a catch cry is like an earworm. I say it and it just rests in your mind and you just settle on it, because it's, I guess the power of taking a client on a journey is not in the meeting, it's in between the meetings while they're walking the dog, they're having a shower and they're just thinking and letting their mind rest. So every surface needs to have a learning intent behind that. We need every piece of the wall to work hard, particularly in contemporary learning environments where there is a lot more transparency and connection from space to space. We need to get some of the basics right, and we don't do it often in our schools.
What are the basics?
If you want to educate, you need to ventilate. We put our kids to sleep because we don't adequately ventilate our buildings. You think about what it's like after lunch. You're a bit tired. I know this is how I feel even in work. It's not at school. It's just work. You've had a meal and whatnot, you sit down after lunch and at 3 o'clock or whatever, you're getting tired. We do that to our young people. We also, I guess, need to explore the opportunities of how kids can start to have a degree of ownership over their learning. So this is a bit of a flip, I guess, where it's less teacher-led and more student-led. So I think one of the things I think you said it in the sense of stories. Stories are powerful. So if we're less learning, for instance, about maths, science, English, geography, whatever, and say we flip that and put a subject matter over that with a story behind it. What if we learn about the Olympics as an example? With that, for instance, we could learn about geography, learn about all the countries that are participating in some of their histories and all that sort of stuff, and write an essay. We might learn about some of the sports and the origin and whatnot, of where they've come from. We might learn about the physics, kick a ball, where is it going to land, and all these sorts of things. But it's under the layer, I guess, of that story, that immersive environment that captures someone's interest. Now we've got them. Now they'll learn. So if we can get our children to a point where they're engaged, the rest of it is then up to them. But often we are presenting them dry fact after dry fact, and it's very hard to understand how that links together. And we've got to do a bit better than that. And we can through intelligence-based design. And that's got to be led by, I guess, a motivated person who's going to design the pedagogy. The pedagogy comes first. The spatial design comes second.
So when you're engaging with people and as your team, I'm leading a team, and that whole thing that you said to me earlier, finding people with that depth of passion that I'm hearing from you, I'm like, can I join? This is really exciting stuff. I have 13 grandchildren.
Well, there you are.
And they're all
different people.
They're all
got different needs.
And they learn differently, the whole thing. So I'm interested in, you started, you went in and you did this. What's like leading people who are creatives and you want them to bring that passion and creativity to an area that needs work?
I think through my role mentoring a design team, I would say it comes down to a concept which I was taught by an educator from the US, bounded autonomy. Everyone needs some autonomy. Everyone needs time for play, as an example. So creating the boundaries around that is really important because design will never stop, as an example. And that doesn't function in a business environment. We do need to get to an outcome. And then that, I guess, interlaid in terms of working with some really motivated people who want to make the world a better place.
Yes.
Now, there's something beautiful about work that will benefit multiple people over generations versus we're designing an RSL and we want to walk people past a bar and the poker machines and we want to keep lines of sight to things where they're going to generate revenue. That's less inspiring for us. So I guess in that instance, capturing the right people that have that sense of generosity, but at the same time, I guess the boundaries that we put around that to enable both needs for the design as well as the business together.
Yeah, I love that piece that you've just explained about bounded or autonomy. It's like, I want people to be autonomous and have lots of elbow room, and we need to give them boundaries.
Yeah.
Otherwise, a creative, and I have a few of those, just go off. And what I get is nothing like I thought. And I'm always clear it's because I didn't have bounded. I didn't put the rail guards in place.
And I think then it's not like you put the boundaries and you walk away and result comes at the other end. It is multi-layered in that. And I think then what I've learned over the years, there's the formal catch-ups with regularity. So we got those milestone events that we need to achieve ... by, because that deadline is kind of like the pressure that forms the diamond, so to speak. Plus, there's the informal catch-ups that happen in between that, which is a little bit more impromptu. And I tend to like to do that in a multitude of ways. But typically, I've got a cup of coffee in my hand. I'm walking through. I'm trying my best to, I guess, project a relaxed demeanor. Not always the case, as one knows when you run a business. But I do my best with that. And that then helps me understand whether they've got the gist of it or they're on the right path. So I guess in that instance, and I guess that comes down to the boundaries and whatnot, but you can sort of nudge a bit on the edge to sort of help them with those bumper rails as they then find their feet, as an example. But I think in those instances where we've got that as a layering. We've also done a lot of work around roles, training guides, and I guess that career development and formation. For instance, how do you turn a student into a director, as an example? And there are many steps in between, but enabling people in an orchestrated way, where do we stretch them and where is comfort? So I like the general premise around an 80-20 rule. Everyone should be 80% comfy, 20% uncomfy. Uncomfy is where we learn. And it's okay to be uncomfortable while you're learning. Yep. We forget that, when you're at school, as an example, and this is something we need to be empathetic of. While kids are learning a new skill, they're going to be a bit crap at it. That's okay. They're going to feel uncomfortable. That's also okay, because you're not going to be as comfortable with something that you've mastered versus something that you haven't. They're two different things. And through that, then we just gradually stretch. I make it sound like it's an accurate science. It is certainly not. And there will be some times where those things get flipped and it's just the circumstance of life. But we try to do that as best as we can so that we, one, grow the professional, grow their understanding slowly but surely, and also start to layer in more and more complexity as their career develops along that way, so that while they're participating on our projects in that bounded autonomy framework, they do have the space and the time to then think critically and come up with something that's really amazing.
Yeah. So I want to go back to that statement that you made, human-centered, research-driven design.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Like, it's pretty powerful. So how do you avoid design theatre and prove impact on what you do?
With that, and I think it kind of comes back to our work that we do with Learning Environments Australasia, and through that we're so incredibly fortunate to work with some of, I think, the world's best learning-based design researchers. And I think with that comes to Melbourne University. It's not to say that other unis in the country aren't doing some good work. There's some great stuff happening in Queensland and Perth and also Canberra. But Melbourne are the ones with the most traction at this point in time. They are working with people all around the globe. And with that, it's kind of showing us, I guess, how some of these things can be measured. So in that instance, we can be a little bit more authoritative in our conversation, I guess, around what works and what doesn't. But it's also taking the educator on the journey with that as well. So sometimes they're not ready for that, and that's okay. We meet people where they're at. But in terms of what design decision to make, there's certainly a wealth of research out there that can inform that. Obviously, what we aren't is researchers, but we do follow that research.
Well, you're following what people have said. You're walking in the footsteps of people who have done the work.
Exactly. Like people like Professor Wesley Imms and Dr. Ben Cleveland, they are some people that have had a disproportional footprint on our sector if you follow their work. And I think there's a lot of learning in that, and not just also in school design, but also workplace design and a whole range of different other facets of where people come together and they need to work in a collaborative manner.
I mean, when you think about the workplace, that's exactly what you want.
Correct.
You want people who have experienced what it takes to do those 4 C's.
Yeah.
Can I communicate? Can I collaborate? Can I commit to this in some way?
I think also, and this is where I think the power of what we do, if we flip it, we've all probably worked with someone who's incredibly talented in ... but cannot work with other people and can't bring them along the way. We all know that. Now, what we don't want to do is create a generation of young people who fit that mold. We need them to be adaptable, because what we know is that the people with high emotional intelligence are the ones that are likely to succeed in life. It's not the IQ, it's the EQ that really does matter. And I look at, for instance, a friend of mine. He was raised in a household in Mount Druitt, wasn't necessarily blessed with, I guess, amazing offerings as a child, but he's earned all of those things on his own. And he has an amazing ability to read a room and understand people's motivators and their where they're coming from, and then to flip something back to them in a manner that reflects their needs. And it's how he succeeded in his life through sales, and now he's leading a major technology company in Australia. It's getting those right skills in those early years, so it's not something that someone just happens to stumble upon, but they've mastered those skills. Yeah. And I think that's more important than quoting how many countries are in the world and things like that. You Google that. We can Google these things. Plus, it keeps changing anyway. So for better or for worse, let's stay off that topic. But it is what it is. Exactly.
Yeah. What about, it's like I can remember hating school. And yet I was incredibly literate.
Yeah.
I read 10 or 12 books a week. I'd go to the library. I had the library cards for all my siblings. And I'd take out 9 books because all of us could have 3.
Yep.
And then I got my mother's card as well. And I'd read them all.
And that's the thing. It's school.
What is that? And school didn't give me that.
And the school systems that we were educated under were designed 150 years ago. And it was designed for people to enter factories.
Yes.
That's no longer relevant for us.
Yeah.
And a lot of these catch cries have been around for a long time. And I remember when I first started working with schools, it was in the early 2000s, and that was a big statement to make, and let's change the world and do whatever. We're now a quarter of the way into this century, and we're still grappling with some of these things. We haven't necessarily adapted deeply enough yet, but there is change that's happening. And I think in that instance, we actually need to take one of those big, deep breath moments and say, how do we actually redesign education to meet the needs of today? Most of the kids in Australia aren't going to a factory. It's not really where Australia's positioned to be anymore.
But
and that's
knowledge workers mainly.
Knowledge workers, that's right. And we need people, once again, if we go back to those foundationals, say the 4 C's, to enable our kids to master those skills inherently in everything that they learn. And through that, we can layer in all the other items, for instance, that they do need to know that might be fact-based. That doesn't need to be taken off the table. But I think there is an element around education which does mean that it becomes a bit of a political football from time to time, and we overlayer curriculum. So the HSC in particular is too full. They need to remove a bunch of things out of it to give that breathing space for actual foundational skills to be developed. And I haven't yet met a teacher who doesn't feel that way. So obviously I'm not an educator, I'm only an architect, but
you're not only an architect, you're an architect thinking about children who are going to be, and young people who are going to enter the workforce, and what's the environment that will cause them to be able to have those 4 C's as the thing.
I also own a business, and I also know what it's like, once again, when you employ someone. To some extent, there's almost like a period of how do we unlearn ... and then start to layer in the learnings that we need you to have. It means that education isn't necessarily meeting the mark when it in some of those instances. And I certainly think architecture education as a whole needs to improve substantially, not by layering more, but being more strategic with the time that they've got.
So repeat your 4 C's and tell me, as a business and how you lead a team that's designing educational spaces to actually cause some of that to rise or to happen.
That's a good point. So we'll start with a simple one, communication. So communication isn't just verbal, but verbal is certainly a part of that. Now, in that instance, one of the things which we like to do is to design what we would refer to as learning settings. And with that, we then need to position people in these spaces, as an example, not just students, but also teachers. And think about what do we need to do in that moment. So what I like to do, I guess, and it comes back to that concept of every surface needs a learning intent behind that. If we're looking at this environment here, I've got a couple of walls, we're in a corner. If one wall, for instance, was a whiteboard, another wall perhaps was a pinboard or perhaps a TV or something for display, we can now use this in a democratic manner where the kids, for instance, can demonstrate their learning. So we're no longer just talking in that shallow learning modality where I tell you something, you try to retain it, and you tell me it back, as an example. We can start to critique the work. And we depersonalize the work in this instance because we're not talking at each other, we're talking at the concept. Is the concept okay? Do we need to flip that? Can we interrogate that concept? And we start to get comfortable with that. That's just communication. But through that, then we start to add, if we've got that foundation right, we can layer in the critical thinking that comes with that. So the opportunity, the space, the time, and the framework of that to enable those comms to, I guess, challenge in a manner that's considerate of your peers. And that's another thing that we need to do. And I guess that comes down to collaboration. For instance, on how do I communicate in a manner that's not going to upset someone, but I need to get my point across. And that's okay. It's okay that I have a point. And there's an element, I guess, of a lot of our culture in Australia, which is founded with, I guess, English culture, which means we do shy away from some of these conversations.
Well, we avoid any kind of conflict.
Oh, gosh, yeah. And I think to some extent, maybe not the right precedent at this point in time, but I think we can learn a bit from the Americans in that way, but not to do it in a brash way. I think there's a middle ground, and that's where Australia could actually be quite strong in. And so if we're
we've got peacekeepers.
That's it.
We've done it well.
That's it. So we're communicating, we're critically thinking, and now we're collaborating a little bit on that, because it's kind of like, I guess, improvisation in acting. Yes, and I hear your point. What if we also ... And then through that, it's the vibe that you create in the room, and we've got to get the right amount of space and the tools around these kids in these environments in different shapes and twists and turns to enable that collaboration so they get their learning a lot deeper. Like, I don't know what your university experience was like, but I know I learned more from my peers, and I think that was by the design of the educators to get that than what I did perhaps in a lecture. And it's kind of like stickier learning. It stays with you.
Well, the more we share what we learn with someone else, so we have on our online learning platform, which I don't know if you ever had access to, the first lesson is teach once, learn twice.
Yeah.
If I
That's
can
it.
get you to teach something that you just learned,
Correct.
you will install it into someone's brain.
That's it.
Because you have to think before you can teach it to someone else.
That's right. You've got to understand it. And then you
Yeah.
ask more questions and then
Yeah.
you feel okay about it. And that's almost like coming back to that sense of play.
Yes.
Allowing that sense of play to poke and prod an idea
Yeah.
and think about it, twist and turn it. But I also think then that overlay of being brave to say this is not perfect. This is an early gestation of an idea, and that's okay. We're going to talk about that. And I know there's going to be holes in it. And I think that's, say, another culture which we try to develop at Leaf, in the sense that as you're designing something, you don't need to scurry away in the corner and make everything perfect and be that hero architect that comes along and says, I've saved the day. The team needs to work together in order to create some really creative and considered responses. But we do that through the mind's trust, or the brain's trust, I guess, in that instance.
So what's it like when you're on these school projects and you've got your team there? You've got parents, you've got staff, you've got boards, you've got funders, you've got regulators. How have you taught your team to navigate all of that? And how have you learned as a leader to navigate all the stakeholders?
I think it comes back to we meet them where they're at.
Say some more about that, because I mean, like, that statement is great. What
does
are
that
the
actually mean?
actual things
Yeah.
that you do that make that work? And how do you, as a leader, as the owner of Leaf Architecture, what is it that has you be able to do that even in your own business?
Yeah. So if I use some scenarios such as, say, we're doing a master plan for a school and we're having some of that consultation, say parents are usually reasonably well informed, but not necessarily with the breadth of education. It's sort of narrow snippets. I'm not trying to downsell them. They're intelligent people.
They're just not their thing.
It's not necessarily where they've spent their life researching, as an example. So often in those circumstances, we run a few different programs to help them communicate more effectively. So in one scenario, we run something which we call Day in the Life of. So it's an empathetic lens that we put over something. We create profiles of people. We give them a name. So we're not talking about things in a manner which is too generic, as an example. So we might talk about Alice. She's a year 8 student. She's neurodiverse. And she's got a passion for music or something like that, as an example. What's it like on arrival? Where does she go? What does she struggle with? Let's start to talk about Alice in that greater detail. And we have other slices and dices, I guess, through the school day and the school year in order to start to provide some of that empathy. We usually do a little bit of research prior. So we put a thumb on a pressure point when we do this. So then everyone's imagining someone in their mind while they're talking about that feedback. So it kind of warms the room up a notch. Then we start to talk a little bit about what we call pedagogy in practice. And through that, we do not show them pictures of spaces, but more sketches of almost like cartoon type like spaces where we're not talking about the design, because I don't want to hear that I don't like the carpet or this or that. It's all inconsequential in reality at this point in time. We start to look at some of those nuances. And then we start to do a bit of a talk, for instance, around the future of education. Now we're kind of getting to that deeper part. We've got to warm them up a notch in order to get to those points. So if someone, for instance, is perhaps pulling in a different direction, we can then perhaps, after going through some depth, refer back to research and how comfortable they are, for instance, in said decision. And often people shift a little bit. You're not going to get someone doing an about face. That's not going to happen. But it's usually shifts of the dial, for instance, that helps them consider a little bit more deeply a concept that perhaps they weren't familiar with prior.
So I know that you've invested heavily in industry leadership and learning environments, Australasia, and you're the chair for 22-24. Why give time to a peak body when you actually have your own practice. And what best practice do you wish every school leader and builder understood?
So I'll start with the time investment.
Yeah.
I think one of the things because kind of like, I guess, how did I get into education? How did I get into learning environments Australasia? It was a little bit of an accident. I turned up to an event a little bit too early, and then they had their AGM and they said, come along. Next thing you knew, I was on the committee. It's just kind of happened. But what I've learned from this is, I guess, the formation of community. So that like-minded group of people who are all invested in making the world a better place, and what we can learn from each other is very powerful. Now, when I look at, I guess, having that Australian and New Zealand stage that role has afforded me, that's also then linked me to some incredible people around the country, and we've done some great work together outside of LEA as well. I would never have met any of those people without these affordances, so that's been really incredible. Further to that, I guess, when we start to look at what should people consider or think about, or perhaps what is a starting point in a school design, I would say take a step back to the start. It's a bit like Simon Sinek, I guess. Start with a why. What's the vision for teaching and learning? What do you want for your young people? Start from there and build from that point. Don't be in a rush to articulate a shopping list. The shopping list is easy when you know what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. I have another question for you. What can business leaders steal from school design if the workplace is also a learning environment, which I believe it is?
It should be.
What design principles drive curiosity, collaboration, focus, critical thinking? So what 3 environmental levers can change behaviour fastest in the workplace?
I think some of these things come down to choice. So a lot of what we would talk about in the design of a learning space will be not all spaces need to do the same thing. So we need choice and we need variety around that. Not everyone responds to the same environment in the same way. Sometimes we need different things at different times of the day. So give choice. And I think there was a lot of catch cry, I guess, around COVID and whether we even need officers. I would strongly say we do. People need to come together. It's when we're together that we're powerful as a group. Mm-hmm. But when we come together, we need to be intentful with our time and be purposeful, I guess, around that. So I guess that choice of space, not just sit at the desk and don't move, we know that doesn't work. You've got to get up, you've got to move, we've got to oxygenate the body, and that increases the ability for you to concentrate. That's just being a human being. Adding the right, I guess, spatial quality within the space, and it's something that we invested in quite a lot with our studio, for instance, in Sydney. Having natural light and the ability to connect to the outside by opening up a window, having all those things are really important. And if we get that plus spatial choice, you've got a huge amount of win. And I guess then for the third of layer, I think it's those communication tools. So when I say that, I guess I'm using some nomenclature that would relate more to school design, but one of the things, for instance, in our studio that was a really big element that we wanted to bring into the space is I wanted whiteboards, I wanted pinboards, I want people displaying their concepts, their thinking, so we can have those conversations not about them as a person, but about the work. And we depersonalize some of those things. It's kind of like, I guess, when I'm trying to have a critical chat with someone, I really like the car ride. We're both looking towards the front. We're not looking at each other. And we can delve a little bit into some of the subject matter that's a little bit uncomfortable sometimes.
Yes.
It's a bit the same when we're trying to critique someone's work and they take it as a personal response when it doesn't need to be. But if we're sitting opposite each other like we are now, as an example, looking at each other, it becomes a bit harder to then sometimes have those critical chats when we need them. Yeah. So I think the environment, I think choice, and I also think then how do we layer in communication that's a bit deeper than sending an email. I think email is the pits when it comes to business.
Oh, it's absolute pits. I love that. It's a little piece of gold for people that are designing their office. Like, how do you want it to work, and how do you want people to interact with each other? Because there's nothing more powerful than that interaction.
Correct.
I mean, I work from home, and I actually love going into the office more than anything. It's like they're a noisy bunch. And they're fun, and they do good work.
And you form the relationships with these people. And I think one of the things is you also got to listen to, how does someone like yourself carry yourself when you're on the phone and you're having a chat, whether it be a good chat, whether it be a hard chat, just listening and learning. You learn through osmosis, I guess, in that instance. And we're shutting a lot of that down, which is really unfortunate.
Well, it just takes something. Like, we were in a meeting last week, at the beginning of the week, and one of my staff I knew wasn't paying attention, but we're on the screen, right? And in the end, at the end of the meeting, I just said, "Hey, stay."
Yeah.
What were you doing?
Yeah.
We're all having this conversation and you're looking down. I sent you 3 messages. Look up. Crickets.
Yeah.
And
that's it. And some of these things can be handled.
You're disrespectful. Here's your colleagues, talking about some of the things that you are involved in.
But it's a bit like taking someone to a candy store to a certain extent, sitting them in the middle and say, "Don't eat sugar." What we're doing is distracting people with all these bits of stimulus.
Yeah.
Particularly in the online world, for instance, it's endless. And now we want them to focus on a certain thing for a period of time. We're actually dehumanizing by doing that. There's a lot of power by sitting opposite each other and just having a conversation.
Nothing more powerful than
because then you're in the moment. Yeah. You're in the moment. You're immersing yourself.
You can't get away from them.
Correct. And that's okay. That's all right.
It's
you shouldn't be scared of that.
Yeah. I think it's healthy and it's stimulating and it's exciting.
Going back to what you said at the start around our young people and perhaps are we raising a stupid generation? We need them to be able to do these things, but we need to encourage them to do it, even if they don't want to in that instance. And we need that construct to enable them.
Cool. A couple of lightning questions for you. A meeting that you've deleted from most projects that no one misses.
That's a good point. I guess I wouldn't say it's a meeting, but perhaps it's the agendaless meeting.
Process. Yeah.
The agendaless meeting.
Yeah.
One of the things which I dislike immensely is meeting without purpose for a couple of reasons. It's one, it's not just about, I want an agenda because of, I was told I need to ask for it. What's the accountability for everyone to turn up with their work completed to actually make that a purposeful discussion? And I think it's getting that across our designers, for instance, to lead that as charge, but also as our industry is being led by project managers. They need to do that as well, as an example, because we have a lot of busyness without effect. Yeah. And it is a bit of a tidal wave, I think, at the moment.
How about this? What's a myth about modern learning spaces you'd kill?
I think when people say, my kid won't learn in open learning spaces, what they're not looking at is the detail behind it. The people who do it well aren't designing open learning spaces. They're nuanced learning studios in the sense that there are lots of moments for your child to immerse themselves in their learning in a manner that they will never have if they're stuck like a battery hen in a classroom.
Okay, give me your Monday morning ritual for leaders planning to change anything.
Good point. One, I get in early. I want to be there prior to everyone. That gives me a chance to sort of settle down, have my coffee and all that sort of thing. I do a bit of clear out on my email so I feel like I'm in control of my day. And then I start to look at the plan for the week that I created on Friday. I always do the planning on the Friday, so I'm not in a rush on the Monday and then unsettled. When I used to do it on the Monday morning, I would be projecting that stress, I guess, to the team. I'm a lot more relaxed now. Then we start the week as a team, and that's not negotiable. We meet as a group and we have a human eye-to-eye conversation whilst for those in each office in that instance. And we join them together through technology. We talk about what the wins were from the previous week and any challenges that we're facing. So we start to share ideas around industry changes and how do we respond to different things. And we also look to then bring in praise. So things that have done that were good and, congratulations and all of that. And then the team lean in and they start clapping each other and all that sort of stuff. So there's an element where they're patting each other on the back, which is fantastic. And then we slide in company announcements and things like that. And we talk about, what do they do on the weekend before we then slot into the workday? So it's about bringing people together, getting them a little bit, I guess, in tune with things that are happening. So they're reflecting on they have got wins, because always what happens, you get your win, you tick the box, you move on to the next task. You forget all this array of things behind you because you're looking ahead. So a little bit of that doesn't hurt. And then we encourage all of our project leaders to then stitch their teams together to have conversations around what's happening the week ahead. So people start to have to think about planning the task that they need to do on which day and how that's going to interact with everyone in concert.
Lovely. Okay. So Daniel Smith, Leaf Architecture. I'm really inspired by the work that you're doing, and you've given me a whole new view on what's possible in education today as someone who's thinking about the environment that our children go into. So thank you for your work. Thank you for your passion for it. I can hear it in every word that you say. And I've really appreciated on having you here at Slicing Through the Noise.
Thank you for having me.
So for our listeners, thank you for being here. If you liked what you heard, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe and share this with anyone that you think has got children and would like to know something about how you create environments where learning is what goes down. Thank you for being here at Slicing Through the Noise.